Hi, this is Same Mdluli. I'm the Curator and Manager at Disruptive Gallery, and you're watching Disruptive Natives. Art, like musicians, I think artists are often asked that question of where did it all begin? And often I think, unlike musicians, with artists, you can't really say where that moment is, where you drew your first picture and you knew that you wanted to become an artist. So I think for me, looking back, I feel like it is something that has innately been in me, so to speak, but it came out in different ways as I was growing up. But I would go as far as arguing that being creative for me has always been a part of who I am. And that has a lot to do with, I guess, being wired differently. So you look at the world in a different way. Possibly where I suppose the love for art grew, because there, of course, my parents took us to lots of museums on Saturdays, lots of parks with public sculptures, places like the harbor. Baltimore has this, one of the harbors that is not just for ships coming to, but it's actually like a cultural hub. And I remember those were that was something that we looked forward to doing. And Baltimore was a rough place because it's, of course, one of the poorest cities in the East Coast, and I think it was a very interesting dynamic, being a family from South Africa, Botswana, living in the US, and I think as usual, the church becomes a very important place for assistance, helping a young couple that is, living with 3 small children in exile in the US. And so, yeah, I think those were again very interesting formative years that start when I look back now, are the formative years of where this interest in the enjoyment in looking at art actually starts. When I matriculated, my parents were quite, I think, progressive in that sense that they allowed us. They didn't really have strict ideas of what we should be doing or which career path we should go. It was pretty much left up to us what you wanted to do, and then take it on. But I think one thing they were insistent on that is for us to go to university, because they had also gone to university. Till this day, I still look at them as a generation, yes, that under their circumstances, it was probably not easy, but they are, like my dad is one of the few people, that can say he has an MBA from the University of Kansas, right? Like, in that, exactly. And my mom with a master's degree from the University of Johns Hopkins for their age group, right? Yeah, so university was quite important, I think, in that sense. So it didn't matter whether I wanted to go and do a fine arts degree, as long as I was in a university. Initially, I wanted to do architecture, but something made me question. At NSA, you did one of your disciplines, for example. So you did either music, dance, drama, or ballet, or art. And then half of that you focused on kind of academic subjects. So, I did the maths and science, higher grade and all of that. And so I could have, for example, gone and done accountancy if I wanted to. But I still wanted to stay in the arts. And something about architecture was like, no, math was not my strong point. although I passed it, yes, higher grade and all. Let me see what fine arts has to offer. And also I thought fine arts would be a good basis to then, should I want to change, and then maybe do an architecture degree, that I'd at least have that foundational base that fine arts would give you. And then I then had an option of, do I go to Wits University, do I go to UCT, do I go to, and I opted to go to Wits Technikon. And nowadays, yeah. And I did that because I actually then looked at what each of these universities were offering. And what attracted me to Wits Technikon was the fact that it focused on the practical aspect of art making and not so much the theory. And I say this to students that ask me as well, why, and would you have changed, or changed your mind, or and I always tell them that till this day I still know how to make a canvas from scratch because of what Wits Technikon teaches you, basically. Whereas to make it from, as in go and buy the wood from the hardware, rebate it, buy canvas from Plaza, staple gun from scratch, and put it together until you have, yes. So, and that's a skill that will never leave you, you know what I mean? And I think for me, that was the value. Even welding, guys, I can weld, yes. Yeah, spaces is a big part, of this relationship to this art thing as well, and I think for me, yes, it comes partly, of course, from being conscious of the notion of space and land, right? Growing up in Botswana, where land is not an issue, and then you go to and grow up in Soweto, where people are compact like that. So you become very conscious of what the significance of spaces is, yeah. And then going into the art space and realizing, so Wits Tech, for example, one of our courseworks was we would have to walk from Wits Tech through Hillbrow to Jubek Park to JAG, because some of our practical classes would happen inside JAG, where we are actually looking at particular examples of artwork. So, for that class, for example, we'd have, and I remember, all of the white kids had cars, so during that time, so they would drive through, and all the black kids would trek through. But it was an interesting thing, because all of us then formed. What that did for us is that we each formed, and you could see it in our work, a very interesting relationship with the city, and the way it comes through in the artwork that we would then make, because of the fact that we walked through, Johannesburg. So at that, and then you arrive at JAG, right? And it's this colonial space that houses art. And you look outside in Jubek Park, and it's all these people, black people, mainly chilling, lying down, leisure, right? But none of them are walking into the art gallery. And then I think that's when, I realized that the art thing in space is primarily about access. How do people access space? Which ties back again to the relationship of how people have accessed space in general, particularly black people in South Africa, given that their movement was controlled, from so much, right? To the point where it was even regulated, right? So, I think for me that was when I then reflecting on my position here, it became important that the space had to be accessible, and then think about how do you do that, Using JAG as an example, why is it that people that are around, JAG don't walk into JAG? And for me, the answer was very simple, is that of course, people have never seen anything inside that building that's a reflection of them. Why would they walk in there? You know, and so I think that was a big part of then what motivated the Black Aesthetic exhibition to start off with. In that I felt that in my programming here, I needed to think very carefully around what has been shown inside the space, and then think about what do people want to see. And of course the answer is always, I think people respond better to something that's a reflection of who they are. There were artists in that show, for example, you know, that were not necessarily strong, right? As strong, let's say, as a Dumile Feni and what, you know. But I knew that by staging that show in a space like this, it's basically being disrupting, right? Because it means now, you know, those names are appearing in circulation, right? As the exhibition is being published. So for me, again, I've said to people, I would like to see as an exercise of having done this, right, of agitating a little bit, right, the market, what some of these artists will be fetching in the auction houses come the next 2 years or so. Because what you know, and if say, you know, one student goes and writes a book on, you know, some random artist we knew nothing about, you know, that's one more book that now exists on this artist that somebody can pick up on, you know. Fine arts needs the type of expressive mode that needs a home, right? Because music, it stays in your nerves, if you know what I mean, right? It has a place where it lives, whereas visual art actually needs, and that ties back again to the question of space. Whether it's about creating a space as an artist for yourself in terms of your own repertoire or oeuvre of work, you create a space that when you look at an artwork, you say, okay, this belongs to so and so because of the fact that there's carved exactly, yeah. Or there's space then in physical sense of, well, you know, a studio space, or yeah. So I'm writing a paper on Tatekolwane, who again, and I think that was a big part of how he understood space as creating a space as an artist for yourself, and space as physical place where your ideas live. And that's why I think the bag factory is such a brilliant concept for him, because I always tell people, like, you know, the bag factory could have been Tatekolane's studio alone. If you think about Kentridge and the studio that he has, right? On top of the hills there, the whole entire factory. But David Tatekolane thought, you know, he turned that space into a communal space. That's about sharing. That's about, you know, creating a space for Black artists to not only think creatively. So So to answer your question, I would say we need to think a little bit more around this notion of creating space. That it doesn't, you know, I think now, and I mentioned the digital platforms and what, and those are potentially the kind of places where we can start shaping a space.